What if raising chickens for fresh eggs got your flock seized? A $700 fine and threats of arrest. In Missouri, Clara Bennett's simple homestead dream turned into a nightmare at the hands of her HOA. Stay tuned for a story of rural defiance, community support, and a crushing fight for justice. In the peaceful suburb of Willow Creek, Missouri, where the mornings were greeted by the soft hum of nature and the occasional moo of a distant cow, 45-year-old Clara Bennett lived a life rooted in simplicity. A high school biology teacher, Clara had bought her $190,000 home in 2019, a charming bungalow with a spacious backyard that she dreamed of turning into a small homestead. In early 2025, inspired by a desire for fresh, organic eggs and a hands-on lesson for her students, Clara built a small coop in her backyard, its wooden frame creaking as she hammered the nails. She brought home 5 hens, named Daisy, Rosie, Buttercup, Clover, and Poppy, their soft feathers rustling as they settled into their new home. Each morning, the hens greeted the dawn with cheerful clucks, their calls echoing through the yard as Clara collected their eggs, the shells smooth and warm in her hands, a small victory in her quest for sustainability. Willow Creek was governed by a strict homeowners association, led by 60-year-old President Leonard Price, a retired insurance agent who enforced rules with a rigid hand. Leonard viewed the neighborhood as a suburban ideal: no clutter, no noise, and certainly no farm animals that could lower property values. The HOA bylaws stated, no livestock may be kept on residential properties, with a $700 fine per violation, a rule Leonard applied with zero tolerance, even though chickens were often considered pets in rural Missouri. On the morning of August 5, 2025, as Leonard drove through the neighborhood in his pickup truck, its engine rumbling softly, he heard the distinct clucking of Clara's hens, their calls carrying over the fence. His brow furrowed, his hands tightening on the steering wheel, and he muttered to himself, "Chickens in my neighborhood? Not on my watch." At 8 a.m., just as Clara scattered feed for her hens, their beaks pecking at the grain with soft taps, the wail of police sirens pierced the morning calm. She froze, a handful of feed slipping through her fingers to the ground as a police SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac, its tires crunching on the gravel-strewn pavement, red and blue lights flashing in the early sunlight. 2 officers stepped out, their boots thudding against the ground, the lead officer, 48-year-old Robert Klein, adjusting his belt as he approached. "Ma'am, we've had a complaint about illegal livestock," Officer Klein said, his voice gruff and unyielding, cutting through the clucking of the hens. Clara's heart raced, her hands brushing against her apron as she stepped forward. "A complaint? They're just chickens for eggs. They're not livestock," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief, the words carrying across the quiet yard. Leonard, who had followed in his truck, stepped out with a stern expression, clutching a fine notice in his hand. "Your chickens violate HOA rules," he declared, his tone sharp and authoritative. "That's a $700 fine, and we're confiscating them." Clara's eyes widened, her voice rising as she gestured to the coop. "They're my pets, and this is my property. You can't take them," she shouted, her words overlapping with the sound of Leonard tearing the fine notice from his pad, the paper ripping with a harsh sound. But Officer Klein, known in Willow Creek for his bias toward the HOA after years of handling their complaints, wasn't swayed. "If you don't comply, I'll have to arrest you for obstructing justice," he snapped, his tone icy, as he unhooked his handcuffs from his belt, the metal clanking ominously. Clara's heart pounded, but she stood her ground, her hands trembling as she refused to let them take her hens, their clucks growing frantic as the officers approached the coop. Officer Klein stepped forward, grabbing her arm with a firm grip, the handcuffs snapping shut around her wrist with a sharp click. "You're coming with us," he growled, his voice low, as he led Clara to the SUV, the door slamming shut with a heavy thud. The second officer opened the coop, the hinges creaking loudly, and began rounding up the hens, their wings flapping wildly as they squawked in distress, the sound echoing through the neighborhood. Clara's neighbor, 40-year-old gardener Tom Ellis, watched from his porch, his voice breaking as he shouted, "Leave her alone!" But the officers loaded the hens into crates, their cries fading as they were driven away, leaving Clara's backyard empty, the fine notice fluttering on her doorstep in the morning breeze. Clara spent 4 hours in a holding cell at the local precinct, the hum of fluorescent lights above her, a constant reminder of her ordeal, before being released with a warning. When she returned home, her coop stood empty. The $700 fine notice crumpled on her porch, the paper stained with morning dew. She couldn't let this go, not just for herself, but for her hens and every resident in Willow Creek who dreamed of a simpler life. Word of the incident spread through the neighborhood, shared during school pickups and whispered at the local diner. The residents, many of whom admired Clara's sustainable efforts, were furious, and her neighbors decided to take action. The next Saturday at 9 a.m., a group of 30 neighbors gathered in front of Clara's house, their footsteps rustling the grass as they set up a small farmers market protest. They brought tables laden with fresh produce, homemade jams, and eggs from nearby farms, the clinking of glass jars mingling with the chatter of buyers. Children ran through the crowd, squeezing rubber chicken toys that squawked in unison, a playful yet defiant sound that filled the air, a symbol of their demand for the right to raise hens. Parents handed out flyers calling for HOA reform, their voices rising in support, the scent of fresh, baked goods wafting through the morning air. The protest caught the attention of the Willow Creek Chronicle, which ran a story titled "Teacher Fined $700, Chickens Seized by HOA, Neighbors Fight Back." The reporter's voice amplifying the community's anger through a local radio broadcast. Encouraged by the support, Clara decided to sue the HOA, hiring a lawyer, 47-year-old Mark Daniels, who specialized in property rights cases. Mark argued that the HOA's rule was overly restrictive and that the police had abused their authority by threatening arrest over a civil dispute, his voice steady and commanding in the courtroom. The trial drew a crowd of Willow Creek residents, their footsteps shuffling as they filled the benches, their murmurs a quiet buzz of anticipation. Clara took the stand, her voice thick with emotion as she recounted the day, her words carrying the weight of her loss. "Those hens were my joy, my connection to the earth," she said, her tone breaking. "They took that away from me." Mark presented legal precedents protecting small-scale urban farming, his arguments sharp and compelling, the rustle of documents loud as he handed them to the judge. But Leonard and the HOA board were unyielding. Leonard claimed the chickens threatened property values and sanitation, his voice nasal and sharp, his fingers tapping impatiently on the table. Officer Klein defended the arrest threat, insisting Clara's refusal to comply justified his actions, his tone gruff and unapologetic. The judge, a 66-year-old known for upholding HOA authority, sided with the HOA, his gavel slamming down with a resounding thud that silenced the room. "The bylaws prioritize community standards," he declared, his voice booming, the echo lingering. Clara was ordered to pay the $700 fine, plus $4,000 in HOA legal fees. The verdict, a devastating blow that left her staring at the floor, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The aftermath was grim. The HOA, emboldened by the ruling, banned all poultry in the neighborhood, announcing the new rule at the next meeting, Leonard's voice echoing through the community center's speakers with a new fine of $900 for violations. Clara, financially strained, had to cut back on her classroom supplies, the sound of her students' disappointed sighs a constant reminder of the cost. Willow Creek, once a place of small-town charm, became a battleground, with residents fearing the HOA's unchecked power. Clara never rebuilt her coop, the backyard now a silent reminder of her lost hens, the morning air empty without their clucks. And so, a dream of fresh eggs became a battle for justice in Willow Creek, Missouri. Was Clara wrong to raise a few hens in her backyard, or did the HOA go too far with their rules? What do you think? Should a simple homestead be banned for the sake of uniformity? Share your thoughts and join us next time for another tale of HOA madness. Until then, keep fighting for what's right. Thank you for listening.